Welcome back to Fixing Fallout 3. In part 2, we will be taking a quick detour to take a look at the Fallout 3 game world and how it could be improved. For those who've played the game countless times, like myself, the world crafted by Bethesda, like nearly all their games, is iconic and easily the best part of the experience. So why am I changing it? Well, I'm not. I'm enlarging it to give the game world a larger and more diverse playscape. One of Fallout 3's major criticisms is its monotone biome. This massive world is all one giant wasteland. The most variation you may experience is a patch of dead trees, or in the density of urban buildings depending on how close you are to DC. To improve the game, this must be changed so various sections of the wasteland are unique enough to provide differing gameplay experiences. This is a pretty basic cornerstone of open world design, and unfortunately, it's something that the modern Fallout series suffers from in almost every installment. However, it seems Bethesda has embraced biome diversity in more recent titles, so perhaps there is some hope for the future. Secondly, this world is not conducive to the story. The weak main plot of Fallout 3, and nearly every other Bethesda title, are often defended as being merely a tour of the main game world, which is really the focus of the game. But if you really analyze where the main quest is taking you, it becomes apparent that almost 50% of the game space is neglected. So if the main quest is acting as a tour guide, which I would agree is almost certainly Bethesda's design philosophy when creating their games, as they seem to put so much more effort into side content than they do the main story, well then, it's not doing a very good job. Especially since, the game fucking ends when you complete the main story. Compare this to other titles even within the same franchise. The best examples, to beat a dead horse, being Fallout 2 and New Vegas. In Fallout 1 and 2, the idea of the final location being located close to the starting location is genius, as it forces the player to navigate through a fairly cyclical loop of the game world in order to reach the conclusion. The obvious downside to this being that it leaves a large hole in the center of the game world. Contrast this to New Vegas, where the main strip is used as a hub area through which the player is guided, towards the wealth of side content which makes up the true meat of the game. I'm going to try to utilize both of these design philosophies when creating the new game world. Thirdly, you may ask why I'm starting here with the game world instead of continuing to fix the main story. Well, theoretically the player can go anywhere after leaving the vault, although I think 99% of players will go to Megaton. The option is still there. But this game doesn't make it all that appealing to go anywhere but Megaton. For these reasons, I simply have to discard the original game world. I mean, DC is not even the center of the map, for Christ's sake. And putting it in the center wouldn't simply solve all the problems, in my opinion. Due to the geography of the region, 75% of the borders of the game world are arbitrary invisible walls. To make the limits of the game world more immersive, the world map must be expanded. Firstly, DC should be in the center, and the Potomac River bisects the game world much like in the vanilla map. However, one big change here will be that the river is much wider and fuller than in the original release. No more dry patches. This time will be an actual barrier which can prevent progress. Well, you can just swim across it, right? No. In the river, and in the game as a whole, radiation will be a much stronger force which can bar you from entry to areas in the early game, if you don't have the proper meds to deal with radiation poisoning. In the case of the Potomac River, trying to swim across will kill you outright, making crossings, and the settlements which dominate these crossings, vitally important. In general, things will become gradually more difficult the further you go from Megaton, which is where you'll be spending most of your time in the early game. I-95 will provide a safe artery for transversal that bisects the game world, parallel to the impassable Potomac River. The interstate is most often traveled by caravans, and so most of the dangers have already been cleared out. Starting in the south, the route runs from Andale to Megaton, to the vitally important crossing town of Arafu, to Canterbury Commons, to the Republic of Dave, and further north through Baltimore. The north and west borders of the map will be impassable due to the Appalachian Mountains, much like in the original game. In the northeast, the closer you come to Baltimore, urban ruins will block your path. The city will be inaccessible because
fuck you, Baltimore!
The southern borders will be inaccessible due to deadly swamplands. I-95 is the only traversable route south, and that has been blocked by mercenaries. More about that in the coming sections. The eastern border, obviously, is blocked by the Chesapeake Bay, which, like the river, has deadly amounts of radiation and cannot be swum across. Local fauna around Megaton will be fairly low-level stuff. The locals have cleared out most of the dangerous enemies because they use the land outside the town for some low-yield crop farms. I'll get back to that later. But also because Megaton is a major trade stop. That doesn't mean there's nothing to fight here. Vicious dogs, mole rats, The smaller version we'll be calling pig rats. Mole rats will be the larger and hairier versions, closer to how they appeared in the original games. Feral ghouls, who cling to an isolated patch of heavy radiation, and a new enemy type called floaters will appear in this area. To the east is Dulles Airport. It is hinted at in the vanilla game, but doesn't appear, which is strange because this part of the map is left virtually empty. Seems like a better place to put that behemoth than some random drainage ditch, in my opinion. In the mountains there be Yaogbai. They are a great addition to the game, and I love the name. But since Bethesda cut the Chinese revenants, the name change makes little sense. Don't worry, we'll deal with that later. Another inclusion to the mountainous regions of the game will be waste wolves. Given how cool the concept art is and how basic the enemy type is, seriously, wolves are in like every post-apocalyptic game. They're an instant inclusion for me. Of course, they will travel in packs, which will make engaging with them tricky, as individually they may be easy to handle, but as one they are a destructive force. The Deathclaw Promontory will be located between the Republic of Dave and Baltimore. Like the original game, this will be an Enclave experiment gone wrong. I don't find the inclusion too egregious. Remember, I want to include as much classic content as I can, but this will be the only area of the game they will be located in. Mirelurks will hang out along the coast and certain stretches of the river. As you will find out, the Anchorage War Memorial, which I'm going to be relocating to Annapolis, is their main nest. I like what Bethesda has done here with this enemy type, but the concept art reveals a potential for so much more. They will come in 4 different variations. Regular Mirelurks, as seen in the vanilla game. Mirelurk Hunters, who are more anthropomorphic and can wield various clubs and tools. Mirelurk Kings, who are these spindly-looking guys. They are fairly weak, but they can wield deadly weapons like tridents, and they will usually be surrounded by their clan, which they can call to their aid with a powerful warning shriek. And finally, Catfish Mirelurks. They'll be the Deathclaw class of this enemy type, to put it into perspective. They're big and bulky and tough, but slow. South of DC will mostly be dominated by human enemies. I'll talk about those in a bit. But in the very southern, swampy parts of the map, these guys, the Wanamingos, will hang out. They're easily my favorite unused concept from this game, and my heart is just begging that we'll see them appear again. They don't even have to be called Wanamingos, but for the record, I like the name change. I just love the design so much. These guys will be fairly tough, soaking up damage while they slowly make their way towards you and deal massive damage. And finally, DC will be populated by much the same enemies. One big change in this area will be introduced in the subway. There are a lot of these, and I think that they deserve an enemy that is only found in these maps. Remember, the first time you see a super mutant in the game? Well, replacing that moment, you will instead run into one of these guys. Rat Claws. As the name implies, their strength is on par with Deathclaws. They are very tough enemies. Like the centaurs, there should be a lot of variation in how they appear. Some are bipedal, others attack quickly on 4 legs. The nests where they lay their eggs are infested with these things. Fortunately, if you avoid these nests, you will only come up against 1 or 2 at a time. So that's all I have to add to the creature features of this game. There should be a greater focus on craftable weapons. I like what Fallout 3 does with the unique craftable weapons, but given the amount of junk scattered throughout the world, these components should be used in a lot more varieties. This would include cut items like the Cryolator, Craftable Mine, Molotov Cocktail, Pneumatic Cannon, and pretty much any junk weapons you can think of from the rest of the series. In general, the loot you will be finding will be a lot more damaged. Very rarely will you be coming across things that are untouched, and maining a well-kept firearm will be a very important skill. Finding vintage firearms will also spice up the variety of dungeon loot. Remember, this game takes place almost 200 years after the war. So most of what you'll be picking through has already been salvaged and resalvaged. Similarly, pre-war medical equipment and chems will be much rarer. More prevalent will be homemade and bootleg variants which are more readily available in shops who specialize in their production. A good example of this is Jet. In classic Fallout, this was a purely post-war invention, although Bethesda has pretty much neglected this caveat. In this world, Jet and other post-war drugs like Psycho will be readily available, while Stimpaks, Buffout, and Med-X will be found in small numbers while scavenging, meaning of course that they will be extremely valuable. This means that in combat situations you won't just be popping 20 Stimpaks anymore. If you do have stims, they will not heal crippled limbs and will only restore health over a short period of time. Otherwise, you have to resort to homemade remedies which are much weaker. To restore limbs, doctors must be visited or temporary stints must be crafted using junk items. Although, if you ask me, limbs get crippled way too often in these games, especially Fallout 3. So maybe that should be tuned down just a little to adjust for the new difficulty. If you're wondering about certain aspects of the map, being, well, blank, story-related locations will be discussed in further videos. That's all I have for now. What do you think? Are there any creatures you think should have been added to Fallout 3? Let me know and subscribe for more.